Well, for the people who are new, this is an ongoing class. And there are two classes that precede it. There is an introductory class and there is a beginning class. And this is an intermediary class. However, if you know a little bit of astrology, you'll be able to follow what's going on. If not, it's a good time to snooze. What it is we have 16 charts. And in the first part of the class, we did all kinds of profiling. Attitude profiles, opportunity profiles, activity profiles. And then we put all the profiles together and we looked at the broad generals of all 16 charts. And we did a lot of cross-profiling because you can drag out all sorts of things out of the character that way that you can't any other way. Then we had the second part of this course was an estimation system. So you're going to see a lot of numbers tonight that are estimation numbers. And the idea is to get some relative idea of how strong each aspect is compared to each other aspect. And how strong each planet is to each other planet. And if you have that, then a lot of other things come clear. You can see whether something is strong in a character or whether the person is likely to utilize it or whatever. And now we are in the part where we're going through all 16 personalities, the outer physical nature and the energetic etheric nature. And after that, we'll go through the emotionality of all 16 charts. And then after that, we'll go through the mentality of all 16 charts. And then after that, we'll go into the individuality and spirituality of all 16 charts. And then all we have to do is go through them one more time to put it all together and put it all in proportion. And you should have then the ability to do quite a bit with understanding character. This evening, we're working on chart number 13, Cat Stevens. You can see we've been at this quite a while. We've already had 41 meetings before this one. So and we're looking at the outer personality. And of all things, we are extremely timely because Cat Stevens has been in the news this past week. He was refused entrance into the United States as a terrorist. And this is one of the big league world-class peaceniks. And somebody who gave many thousands of dollars to the 9/11 disaster, and they won't let him in because he's a Muslim and they think he associates with people who are bad and things like that. All right. As we look at each of these charts, we're also taking classical things. Like with Gandhi's chart, we did a classic study in what makes power. And with Eleanor Roosevelt, we looked at what makes for affability. And for a couple of them, we've looked at how artists develop their aesthetic, their philosophy of what they think is beautiful. And we could have done that again with Cat Stevens because we have a classic with Libra rising, which is the sign that is most associated with beauty. But I don't want to repeat that, so I want to do something a little bit different this time and look at one thing that is part of beauty or working with beauty, and that is sensitivity. With Neptune in Libra, conjoined to the ascendant, it's the perfect time to look at sensitivity. Neptune, more than any other planet, indicates sensitivity to the inner spiritual worlds. So now we depart from astrology, and for a few minutes we go into mysticism so we can understand what we're trying to get at. Now, mystics have very interesting notions about sensitivity. They claim that the spirit and its more inward vehicles, like the auric desire body or the mind, when they're loosely connected to the dense physical body, this is what produces a sensitive. More exactly, they claim, with the energetic body, the etheric vital body, is what is loosely connected to the dense physical. That is specifically what produces a sensitive. If the connection of the inner vehicles to the dense physical body is strong and very perfectly aligned, you have somebody who's well-grounded. And we say that such an individual is sensible because they have come to their senses, so to speak, and they're anchored in the physical body and in the life of the senses. They're attuned to the world. Some of them are almost never sick. If such an individual were to walk into a class like this, that individual would think this was all humbug. And that individual would not be intuitively sensitive to the same things that a person is sensitive to if a person does have that loose connection, if they are sensitive.
What indicates a loose connection then?
Well, Neptune conjoined the ascendant is one thing that does that.
It does.
Yeah, we're going to get to that.
Because it's Neptune.
Yes, yes. Very often you have to tell by observation.
But they would think, what is humbug?
They would think all of this is humbug because they're so attuned to the life of the senses and they're so insulated from their inner nature that they don't pick up intuitions. They don't feel the vibes that are in the air. They're all in the senses and they miss a lot of this. Such an individual wouldn't even bother with something like this, not because they thought it was humbug, but it isn't a matter of material consequence. Who would want to go to a class that is about weird things like that, especially it can't be worth anything because there isn't any charge of money. That's the way that kind of individual thinks. If it's materially worth something, it should be charged for. Because the sensitive is not so fixed in the outer world, the focus of attention can be turned inward. And they can then be attuned to the higher vehicles which are not so bound up with material things. Now, mystics claim basically that there are two main reasons. There are going to be plenty of other reasons, specific reasons, but there are two main reasons why people have loose connections between the inner bodies and the outer body. And they both have to do with spiritual evolution. Some people have a loose connection with their physical body because in their involutionary career, they haven't come into the dense physical body. They're not completely in this world yet. This is because a lot of individuals, as they came more into the physical world, saw that the inner light was turning off. And they didn't like that. And so they, to some extent, refused to come into the dense world and the dense physical body. So they have eschewed as an act of will and as an act of preference coming into the physical world. Now that act has its price. First of all, there is a lack of appreciation for all the splendors of this world. If they think everything in this world is illusion, or that nothing in this world is worthwhile, they're not going to enjoy all the beauties that are here. Also, if they aren't really with the times, and the times are right now to be materially in the world, if they aren't with the times, then they're really not participating on a par basis with the ongoing creative work in the world. And the biggest loss is the loss of objectivity. This world is very limited. The very thing that people who haven't evolved completely don't like. They don't like the limitations. But it is those very limitations that give us objectivity. The dense world fights back, and it's got its limits, and if you can't see in all directions at the same time, and you have to look with just one perspective, you look very carefully, and you develop an objective way of measuring it. Almost any psychologist can tell you that any time you don't follow through on a fundamental commitment, and our participation in the ongoing evolutionary creation is a very fundamental commitment. If you don't follow through, it sicklies the soul. Sigmund Freud said that coitus interruptus produces neurosis. And you become neurotic if you don't follow through with what you're doing. Of course, he thought it was all only sex. He didn't see that related to everything, like getting a PhD. Then there's the other kind of sensitives. The other main group of sensitives are not involutionary or involutionary laggards. They are evolutionary sensitives. They are the people who are graduating from the dense physical world. They've given themselves, and they've given themselves very fully to the involutionary material work. And they've succeeded to such a degree that they've mastered it. And in so doing, they have a kind of objectivity. And they even have a feel for the nature of substance. For such an individual to stay in the material world, the limitations of the material world are not what's at issue. It is the fact that they've outgrown some of that. And the material world feels or fits like a shoe that you've outgrown. It pinches. You're growing into something else. They have avoided becoming too attached to the material world, which is a big downfall because the material world is so beautiful. You can get sensualistically and acquisitively and other ways attached to the material world. And so they are beginning to disengage themselves. For such an individual, which is probably most of the people in this room, this world is not enough. There has to be something more beyond it. So some people want to retreat because they don't want to come into the material world because the lights go off, or at least for a short while they do, and others are going back into the spiritual worlds because they've learned as much as can be learned from this. They feel fulfilled. They have soul power. They have all kinds of knowledge. And now they're ready to progress forward back into the spiritual realms. So the question is, with Cat Stevens, is he an involutionary or an evolutionary clairvoyant? Or a sensitive? Or whatever Neptune in the first house means for him. Now, there are various different criteria that you can use for determining involutionary versus evolutionary sensitivity. None of them are certain, but some of them are pretty accurate. We don't have time to go through a whole long laundry list of them because we'd be here for weeks just on the personality of one person. Now, one of the things to do is to observe the Neptunian behavior. Astrology doesn't mean that you're absolved from observation. It allows you to observe better and to observe more deeply. Traditionally, in all astrology, for the last century, there have been two distinct modes of Neptunian behavior that have been noted that stand out from all of the others. In one mode, there's almost a pathological passivity. It is an acceptance of life that is more than faithful acceptance. It just takes whatever comes, especially in spiritual things. In such an individual, there's a lot of gullibility, incredible gullibility. Such an individual will believe anything. So there is a sensitivity that works that way. Also, in this kind of individual, there is a fatalism, and almost a torporous immobility, like a person gets into a malaise where they just want to lay there and do nothing. That pretty much is the behavior of an involutionary sensitive. It's almost as if they spend all of their soul power and all of their will not coming into the world. And since they believe so much in the spirit and can't believe that there's any possible value for coming into the world, why do anything? It's the kind of posture that you would expect of people who are used to having the evolutionary hierarchies that guide our evolution, having them nudge them into everything that is done. There's not an idea of self-determination. There's not an idea of free will or taking things for yourself. So there's almost, it's like a stunned placidity to the character. You find a lot of this in Neptune. In fact, look at some of the early textbooks of astrology. That was the first thing that was seen. The other kind of Neptunian behavior, if you start observing, it's characterized by intense idealism. It could even be called super idealism. A person strives with the highest possible ideals. It's as though the personality has been touched by God, and it aspires ardently, extremely ardently, to the most supernal heights that you can think of. Sometimes included in this behavior is an urge to wield spiritual forces that work behind nature. This is a classic magician or a classic occultist. Now, if we look at the behavior of Cat Stevens, it falls clearly into the latter mode. If you are familiar with any of his music and any of the movements that he's dedicated himself to, he's extremely idealistic, almost foolishly idealistic. He had wealth and he gave it away in enormous quantities. Before settling into Islam, he tried almost anything that appealed to his sensitivity. And that included a lot of different things. It was one of those things that any time there was a new cult or something that was in town, he was there immediately. He wanted to know what was what with it. Drawing on the impressions from his sensitivity and composing is for him his magical activity. When he was young, he sought for celebrity, he sought for wealth, and having a healthy share of them, he wanted something more. The shoe pinched for him. He wanted something more that went beyond fame and wealth and all of those things. So we have in his behavior, we have a classic definition of an evolutionary Neptunian sensitivity. Now, by the way, what we're doing here in class is parallel to what is in the written brief. In the notes that did you get one of the, yeah, here they are. So the written brief is altogether different. It's parallel, but it's altogether different, and I'm trying to have a two-track approach to all of this. And the written is much more like you'll find in regular astrology books, and it doesn't go so much into mysticism and other approaches to reality. All right. Now, some might think that his acceptance of the authority of Islam is an indicator of his being a passive Neptunian. I don't think that's so. It's not severe enough, and it's not passive enough like a medium or an unquestioning behavior to be that kind of psychological flaccidity. And some of the things he did are, shocking to me. Like when he sold all of his major possessions when he became a Muslim, and he took an arranged marriage. Took an arranged marriage and had 5 children in that marriage. It's not quite the kind of passivity, though many people that do that are of that nature. His attraction to Islam is similar, but it is consciously, voluntarily that he does it. I think it's because he recognizes vulnerability and his frailty in people who are sensitive. Enormous physical strength doesn't usually come along with that. There are people who are more vulnerable. And because of their higher view of the cosmos, they realize that we're very vulnerable, that we really don't have power to control everything in our current state of evolution. In fact, by his own admission and by his behavior, he realized that he had more fame and celebrity than he could handle. Neptune is square to Mercury, has its strongest aspect, so there's a certain amount of confusion. Always has been in his life. We'll come back to it more later on, especially when there is increased spiritual input. The mind can't handle everything that the spirit can deal out to it. Now, there's nothing of great depth in this character. Both Saturn and Pluto are very weak planets. So realizing his vulnerability and realizing his frailty and not having something profoundly deep and resolute, he looks to religion, something structured for what he lacks in his life, and this is why he has chosen Islam. All of the tenets of Islam you can learn in 5 minutes. You can become a Muslim over the phone in 5 minutes. I heard it being done on a All Things Considered broadcast. All you have to do is believe in Allah and believe that Muhammad is the prophet, and that's it. And you're off and running. So he wanted something simple, but he wanted something also that had structure. Now, very often, especially in the evolutionary kind of sensitivity, Neptune can indicate spirituality as well as sensitivity. We know he has sensitivity, but whether he has a ponderous spirituality as well is not so clear. I know 2 people who are sensitive enough to be clairvoyant, and they're not mediumistic clairvoyants. But these 2 people, neither of them could be considered ardent spiritual aspirants. They're like everyday people. In fact, both of these people are agnostics or atheists, one or the other. It's a very strange thing. So I use that as an example to show you that someone can be sensitive without necessarily being spiritual. They may even have clairvoyance, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're spiritual.
Could you say more about Saturn and Pluto being weak and how that affects him? Just kind of hinted
Yeah, I don't want to talk about it now. It will come up somewhere in the next 4 or 5 years.
Hold that thought.
If we start going at this year round, it'd probably go much
Is
faster.
that how you look at people's charts, Richard?
No, this
is
is-
a line and say next year I'm
No. But sometimes if I'm working with people on issues, I'll work on one issue and I won't spring all of them on the person right away because the person has to come to some realization of some things before they can take other things.
That's why you said it's not deep and resolute.
Yes. Not a lot of strong fixed sign things, and not a lot of Saturn and Pluto. Saturn and Pluto are probably the two deepest of the planets.
That would make him less grounded if he doesn't have strong fixed signs and
That's correct. Yeah, especially not having anything in Earth.
Except for what he
What?
I think he has one thing in Taurus.
Only the
Oh, no,
dragon's
that's
head.
no.
No planets. All right. So we know that Neptune is positioned to indicate sensitivity by the conjunction to the ascendant. But Neptune is not a strong planet. Involutionary sensitivity often accompanies outright weakness. There is no such thing as a powerful medium. That is a contradiction in terms. A medium is a weak medium because the medium is weak. Venus, however, in this chart is very strong. It's the strongest planet in the chart. It's the life ruler. And Venus both deposits and disposits Neptune. By deposits, we mean that it rules the cusp of the house of which Neptune is in. And by disposited, we mean Neptune gets its disposition from the sign that is ruled by Venus. So in this case, Libra is on the ascendant and Neptune is in Libra, so Venus deposits and disposits Neptune. This means that Neptune is at the disposal of Venus. It's in her hands. Now Venus is in Gemini, which is anything but deep. And Venus is in the ninth house. And the ninth house is the house of religion. The nature of religion is orthodoxy. The orthodoxy of the abstract ruler of the ninth house, Jupiter. In many cases, not all, but in many cases, religion is the enemy of spirituality. Even though every religion has its foundation in spiritual experience, in mysticism, the more a religion organizes, the more it becomes formal, the more it becomes acceptable to the world, the more it crushes out any possibility of a lot of mysticism. Evolutionary Neptunian spirituality wants spiritual experience. It wants spiritual power. Religion, on the other hand, is usually more for the people who are weak and who are blind and who want religious stability. And they even want dogmatic faith. It's the 12th, the 8th, and the 4th houses that are houses that represent more direct spiritual experience. One withdraws from the world in those houses and either leaves the body or turns inward and gets direct spiritual experience. There's nothing in the 4th, 8th, or 12th houses except Mars, which is certainly not what you would call a spiritual planet. So we see then a very strong Venus in the 9th house, and this seems to indicate that religion prevails over mystical spirituality. And for him, religion is a Venusian matter. He thinks in terms of love and kindness, which are really spiritual values, but he doesn't go at them as a mystic would do it. He thinks about them in a simple, monotheistic way. Islam does not have a history of being an especially loving religion, to say the least. I've read the entire Quran very carefully over a year to do it, and I looked at it with an eye to love, and I could not find the word love anywhere in the entire Quran. But Islam is something of a paradox. I don't know how to say it any other way. Every religion has its paradoxes. On one hand, Islam is the religion that has, of the world religions that we know right now, that has the most violent history. It's even more violent than Christianity. Violence to infidels or even misbelievers is a religious duty in the Quran. Vengeance is a religious duty. But on the other hand, if you look at the symbols of Islam, they're extremely feminine. They have a lot to do with the feminine planets, the moon and Venus. The emblem of Islam is the moon, crescent moon, and Venus. So the religion has that, it's drawing on that in the cosmos, the moon and Venus, something very feminine. The Muslim calendar, which is used for determining all the religious holidays, is the only completely lunar calendar in the world. No other religion in the world uses something that's completely lunar. And Islam is the only major religion, and the only one that I know of at all, that has as its primary worship day Friday, which is a Venus day. Almost as if what the religion isn't, it has as its ideals. Which makes sense, I guess. And if you look at the archetypal Muslim body, and the last two pictures in the photos collection shows that he's done a really good job of developing a typical Muslim body. You would even think that he was somebody that was born and raised in a Muslim body all of his life. There's something very soft about it. Muslim men, as they get older especially, seem to be very, very soft physically. Yusuf Islam is the name that he took, and he's done a pretty good job of personally becoming a Venus type of personality. All right. Hey, we're moving right along. We could be out of here in an hour's time. Unbelievable. Oh, no. For people who are Rosicrucian students, and there are several that are in the group here, including myself, there is one thing that clinches the fact that he is an evolutionary sensitive rather than an involutionary sensitive. I studied with the Rosicrucian Fellowship, and the founder of the Rosicrucian Fellowship was a man named Max Heindel. He was a trained clairvoyant and was capable of following people back through a number of lives. In the latter part of his life, he dedicated his use of astrology exclusively for astrodiagnosis and exclusively for healing work, to determine what the conditions were behind the physical condition and when you could do the most to help that person to change in their psychology and physically by healing. So with his clairvoyance, he found out the spiritual or the behavior basis for many diseases. One of the things he found out was that tuberculosis was the result of too much and too deep and too attached of a relationship to the material world. Often it is an emblem of somebody who has sold out love and other spiritual values for material ends. Now, I didn't have a chance to do a comprehensive study because it would take a bunch of math that I wasn't able to do. In fact, I just barely got all the notes ready for the little bit that we have tonight. But at age 19, Cat Stevens was diagnosed with having tuberculosis. And he withdrew from the world for at least a year, even though he was in the really on the upswing in his career. This happened at the time that he was selling what he loved so that he could get fame and fortune. Now, in the horoscope, students of astrology learn that the horizontal, which rules the ascendant and the descendant, has something more to do with material and earthly opportunities. It represents the horizon of the earth. Thus, the midheaven, which has more to do with the vertical, which has more to do with the midheaven, and the nadir has more to do with vertical relationships, relationships that raise you up in the world. And so mystical astrologers find that by progression, when the ascendant progresses faster than the midheaven, then one is best or is wisest to, when an opportunity arises that you could do one of two things, to take the more material. Because the orientation of the life is more toward material activity. But when the midheaven progresses faster than the ascendant, then one chooses the more spiritual opportunity because that you're more in tune with living out your life that way. Let me be careful I don't lose myself. For an example, suppose an opportunity comes up that you could either become a minister or an insurance magnate, both of which could be ruled by the ninth house. If the ascendant moved faster than the midheaven, it would be the wisest to help people with their insecurities by becoming an insurance person. However, if the midheaven moves faster than the ascendant, it would be wiser to become a minister and minister to their spiritual needs. Now, in the horoscope of Cat Stevens, the midheaven moves faster than the ascendant. Therefore, his lifetime is much more efficiently spent in the more spiritual options when there are times of opportunity. At the time he was diagnosed with tuberculosis, the progressed ascendant was square to the natal sun in the 10th house. This indicates, since the sun was way up in the vertical, and the ascendant itself, which represents the horizontal, when hit by progression came to a square, it indicated that there was a basic conflict between the material and the spiritual. This conflict may have been a backstop to keep him from pandering too much to the material world. And even though he didn't consciously know about astrology and these teachings in astrology, or even about the meanings of different kinds of illnesses, the spirit inside knew. And so having the tuberculosis, there was an understanding, I think, in him spiritually, so that he knew that it was more important for him to spend his life in spiritual things rather than pandering to fame and success. Fame and success came to him anyway, hand over fist, but he, from this point on, after the tuberculosis, there was a marked intensification of his spiritual seeking. Now, of course, all of this is a side trip, but it's interesting and informative, and I hope helpful for you. But the relevant thing is that he had the tuberculosis, and that is an illness that indicates too great of material immersion, and that it marked a turning point in his life for greater spiritual seeking. So this, more than anything else, as well as his behavior, as we looked at before, this is a long, slow, tedious study of sensitivity, but
Can you open the door?
yeah. Oh, it's getting warm in here.
I think so.
So this indicates more than anything else that he has an evolutionary variety of sensitivity. All right, that gives us a little bit of an understanding of his sensitivity, and also gives us a little bit of an understanding of his personality. Now let's turn to the application of his sensitivity and learn a little bit more about the sensitivity and personality. You do a progression. You can either do a primary or a secondary progression. If you do a secondary progression, which is the most common, you take and go, well, he was about 19 years old, take 19 years after birth and see and cast another horoscope for 19 days after birth at the same time, every day, same place, and then you see which had moved more, midheaven or descendant. He has a sign, Virgo and Libra are very much signs of long ascension. That means that the ascendant moved very, very slowly with those rising signs. Virgo and Libra are the signs of longest ascension, and the opposite signs, Pisces and Aries, are the signs of shortest ascension. You can use that as a rough rule of thumb.
And you said a while back you made a statement about shortest and longest. What is the ascension? That their characteristics, that they had specific characteristics.
No, I just said that.
Yeah, I understand. But you made a statement, not tonight, but on a previous occasion, you made a statement, something about short ascension or longest ascension.
Yes.
Have specific characteristics, or that are
Yes.
Which are what?
The short. My life is a perfect example. I have a sign of long ascension rising, and that means the ascendant is moving as slow as it's going to move, and that means as it progresses, it's going to speed up. And this is the sign of somebody that starts out like gangbusters with the spirituality and then sort of slows down and runs out of gas. And the same thing with the sign of shortest ascension. You may be extremely material, but as time goes on, you're less and less inclined that way. Whereas if you have some of the other signs, like if you have Cancer rising, which is in between, but it's in between. It's neither long nor short. But as life goes on and the ascendant moves from Cancer into Leo and then into Virgo, then the ascendant will be slowing down progressively, and the midheaven always goes at the same rate. And such an individual then, by comparison, the midheaven will always be faster as life goes on. And that's somebody that's not losing gas as far as spiritual assertion. It is somebody who's actually picking up momentum and going faster. And you can tell that there are times, the interesting ones are the ones that are across the solstices, because they may switch gears. That they may, when they're born, they may be in signs where the midheaven is moving more slow than the ascendant, but then things switch around and they go the other way around. So there are all kinds of combinations.
Okay.
So what did you say moved quickly? Aries?
Yes. Aries and Pisces. Yes. They're also the signs that you find the most. It has to do with the obliquity of the ecliptic, and those are the signs that you're more frequently inclined and receptive in the first house. Because they're very neither moving along there. All right. slowly here. The ascendant is the primary indicator of the physical body and the outward personality. And our physical body is our interface with the external world around us. We ourselves are foci of the universal spirit, but we focus through our bodies. And our bodies, in this regard, from an astrological point of view, are something like the swinging doors of a saloon in a Western movie. They swing in or they swing out. In the written brief that you have in your hand somewhere, there is a study of the more outward appearances of his personality. Let's do something different in this oral presentation, and let's look more at the influx rather than the outflow. Let's look at what does he see or what does he notice in the external world, and how does he see it? Because what has your attention is what has you. Obviously, there are many, many possibilities. But first, let's see how he perceives. Neptune, as we have been seeing all along, indicates basic sensitivity. But that sensitivity can be general, or it can be specialized, or it can be selectively specialized. Unless a character is very broad and widely developed, general sensitivity is most likely. It's most likely found with the involutionary sensitives. So the poor sensitive, involutionary sensitive who has no control is a general sensitive. Whatever has the strongest spiritual force is what it will pick up. If somebody comes to them with great fear, that sensitive will pick up the fear because that's what's strongest. Because you're involuntary or involutionary, you don't have any choice. Specialization, on the other hand, is usually not a wise thing, especially with regard to spiritual growth. For example, there are exercises that you can do to remember your past lives. However, it's much wiser to develop the capacity to look at anyone's past life rather than your own. Because if you become specialized in such a way and you get hooked on looking at your own past lives, you become very subjective. You have a very subjective view of the cosmos. There's more to the cosmos than us in our past lives. And it's wise to be looking out for others in the greater picture of things. However, specialization in sensitivity, such as learning how to do one thing or become sensitive to one thing and then another, is how it works. Almost all sensitivity begins, of the controlled variety, begins with concentration, and concentration is de facto a specializing activity. Now, Pat Stevens is not a Renaissance man. He's not as sensitive and interested in all things. He's not sensitive in all of the ways that one can be sensitive. However, it would not be wise to say that he is a specialized sensitive either. The way in which his sensitivity seems to work seems to be more important than the things to which he's sensitive. I'll repeat that because that's important. The way in which he is sensitive seems to be more important than the things to which he is sensitive. At this point, we have to have examples, I guess. If the things he were sensitive to were the important matter, we would have an easily definable personality. For example, with Libra arising, if he was sensitive to things of human artifice, We could say that he was an aesthete. We could peg him right away. He would be somebody that would be sensitive to objects of art. But if you look at the art that he does, there's plenty of variety. There are all the subjects that you would expect to find with Neptune in Libra rising and a very strong Venus. There are songs about love, about women, about relationships, and partner relationships. And he has whole albums dedicated to peace. But there's a wide variety. You just can't say he's a peace writer or a love writer or anything like that because he's so varied. The tendency is to categorize him as a folk singer-songwriter, but even that doesn't work because there's so much variety. I haven't listened to a lot of his music yet. It's along with while I'm reading biographies, I'm going to be listening to Cat Stevens' music. Everybody here is going to be reading biographies, you know. This is an ongoing joke that's been going on. But of all the songs that I know of, and going through lists of songs of his, the only thing that I could find that was common to all of them was some aspect of light. He's sensitive to light. However, he's not strictly sensitive to external light, but he's more sensitive to the interplay between external and internal light. If it were strictly external, it would be a good example of that would be SAD. If you know what SAD is, seasonal affective disorder. When people have a lot of things, sun and ascendant, for example, in fiery signs, those are people that have seasonal affective disorder. And when the days start getting shorter and shorter, they become more and more blue and even physically ill, and all they want to do is sleep.
What is the sign again? I'm sorry, I just missed it.
Usually a lot of primary significators in fire signs, like sun and ascendant, or sun, moon, and ascendant, or ascendant and the ruler of the ascendant. There's a lot of fire, I find, in SAD charts. His sensitivity could be described as a sensitivity to light, external light, and lucid spiritual light, and it's an intuitive sensitivity. He is sensitive in such a way that light triggers an intuitive light, and that intuitive light is created. Now, it follows a pattern. We've done this before. Astrologically, Neptune indicates sensitivity to the external world. And being a Libra, he feels he has to complement that external world. He has a very personal relationship with the external world. He's sort of like the alter ego for the external world, which is very difficult for Libra rising people because it makes them have to be more individualistic than they care to be. Like all of us, there are things that he loves. Whether they're pleasant or not, he's attracted to them. He has a sensitivity focus that he sees some things in a special light. And that special light is almost as if the external and internal light are in sync with each other. When that relationship is awakened, it takes place through Venus, the ruler of the ascendant. Anytime anything happens in Libra, Venus is affected. And so his sensitivity to the external world and the compound internal-external light brings Venus into play. Venus is very closely related to Uranus. Its strongest aspect is the conjunction to Uranus. And that is instantaneously activated. And all of this happens so quickly that it seems simultaneous. So thus he has the experience in the external world, and suddenly everything seems new. And it seems like he's discovering the external world and discovering something nobody else has ever seen in the external world. And because he is what he is, because he's an evolutionary person, it is a creative moment. It's not just a sensitivity moment, it's a creative movement. When Uranus is brought into play, he's almost impelled to be creative. There's another way it works. The medium of creation with both Venus and Uranus in Gemini is what Hamlet would say, words, words, words. Lyricism, phrasing, new uses of words, or very unique uses of words are what's involved in his writing. That's covered a bit in the personality brief.
That's because of Gemini, right?
Yes.
The Gemini in another chart, like, indicates something other than words?
Yes. Facts. Even little whole scads of percepts, I think what philosophers call them. Now, this process of instantaneously seeing something and having words come to him is not something that's deliberated. Because if it were deliberated, all the spontaneity would be shut down. And this is a chart that's high in spontaneity, which is another thing that's covered in the written brief. Venus-Uranus aspects are aspects of spontaneous creation. This may even be, looking into Gestalt of the whole chart, it may even be why the judicial and the deliberative planets are so weak. This is by intention. His whole character is biased toward being spontaneous and being able to create in the moment, and there's an avoidance of deliberation. The process can't bear too much mental activity. If he mentates too much, it gets shut down. Mercury is square to Neptune, and that indicates a parallel disaffinity between mentality and the Neptunian intuition. He's not developed his mind so much that he can delineate what he experiences from the Neptunian intuition, and things get garbled. So his stream of intuition can't be accommodated by mental activity. This doesn't mean that he's stupid, or it doesn't mean that he doesn't think, but that when he's functioning at his best, and when he's working with his sensitivity, it is in the realm of spontaneous creativity. It's just like things just fall off to him. Now the funny thing of it is, even when he does do mental things, or when the Mercury-Neptune is inactive, I don't know if you ever heard any of his songs, but this really rolls all kinds of things together. It's garbled. But even the garbling is beautiful. I don't know how to say it any other way. It's the way he does things. When the creation that is born of the Venus conjoined Uranus, by symbol anyway, it comes back out through Neptune, because Neptune is right there. Neptune is the doorman. Everything that comes in and everything that goes out has to go through Neptune.
Because it's on the ascendant?
Yes. And so Neptune brings back a sort of a spookiness and a shadowy quality to what he does. And it holds true. All right, at this point we have to stop here, or go into a little sidelight. We didn't do it last time. We should do this all the time, so we're going to get them all of the aspects covered.
Does he have a lot of miscommunication, like?
Oh, no doubt.
He didn't mean to say that Salman Rushdie should be dead.
What?
He didn't mean to say all those things about Salman Rushdie.
I think he was conned on that deal. Because I don't think there's anything about him that is deliberate that he would want anybody killed. I think he was conned, like, sign this.
Now, what about, though the aspect is separating, Mars squared Uranus is a bit of, could mean some sort of anarchism or violence, could it not?
Yeah, but I don't want to go into that now. We'll probably go into that when we look at the main patterns of the emotionality, which will be the next thing that comes up in about a year and a half.
Okay. I just meant...
We'll actually get to some of the emotionalities this spring yet.
The only reason I brought that up was because of somehow the fear that they didn't let him in the country,
Yeah. Yes. In fact, if you want a symbol for that, if you look very carefully, you'll see that he was turned back. The 12th house is the house of exile. You can't go there anymore. And he was turned back when the sun was exactly on top of his Mars in the 12th house.
Oh, that plum was right there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So what we have here is a very strong planet, Venus. A pretty strong aspect, the conjunction, and a moderate planet, Uranus. It's not really weak, but it's moderate. So Venus holds sway, but the aspect is strong enough to bear up to it. It's not, like if the conjunction were really weak and Venus were really strong, all of the quality of Venus could not come through the conjunction because the conjunction wouldn't be enough to bear up to it. Venus, as we know, represents individual love, taste, art, sociability. Uranus indicates altruistic love and intuition and creativity and to a large extent unorthodoxy. The conjunction is a uniting aspect. Sometimes it's a breakthrough aspect, sometimes it's a fusion aspect, and sometimes it's a concentrating aspect. So you can say in one way that the work of this aspect is the fusion of love. Or it's like creative breakthroughs. Or it's the uniting of irregularity and sociability. In all cases, in the whole family of Venus-Uranus aspects, there's a high degree of romanticism. In all cases of Venus-Uranus aspects, there is a likelihood to spontaneity, especially spontaneity in creativity. Now, in the afflictions, which we don't have, there can be indiscriminate love and taste. In the horoscopes of male, the afflictions between Uranus and Venus are often the signature of homosexuality. Most especially the kind of homosexuality that results from the inability to discriminate between altruistic or universal love and universal affection or demonstration. Universal love just sort of spills over into personal demonstration. This kind of homosexuality could be called Greek, because the ancient Greeks held as their highest ideals men. They considered women inferior, and as a consequence, for the women to endure it at all, women were only for bearing children. To endure it at all, the women of ancient Greece became alcoholics. and the men ridiculed him for drinking so much wine, so it was like a syndrome kind of thing. The men had as their ideals other men. And because Uranus has a quality of newness about it, an eternal kind of newness, it has a quality then of a puerile innocence. Therefore, seeing little boys as becoming men was a kind of puerile innocence which the men had lost, and then they spilled over from universal love into universal affection and beyond, and lost their innocence. And the more they lost their innocence, the more they tried to capture it back through boys. It becomes it's altogether different kind of homosexuality than Roman homosexuality or Persian. Each has a different flavor to it. But all right. The benefic combinations all have art as second nature to the individual. Art flows effortlessly. They can make beautiful things. I think they can walk by that bunch of flowers out there and just brush up against it by accident, and it'd come out into a lovely formation. And the Zen Buddhists would think that's the way it's supposed to be done. In the benefics aspects, the universal love is such that when a person is very altruistic, as is indicated by Venus and Uranus, when a person is very altruistic, that comes through them. And they have a look in their eyes that when you meet such an individual, you say, I know this person. I know this person for a long time, or I know this person from before. That's what we were talking about earlier. That happens. And anytime you're really in an altruistic mode, you're really friend-like, and everybody says, geez, where do I know him from? Or where do I know her from? And that's what happens. In fact, there is, when the Uranian, even in the afflicted Venus or Uranus, there's an Uranian color to the, or light to the aura, that even if you're not highly clairvoyant or just on the fringes of clairvoyance, that you can see that light. Now, a discriminating gay can say, that's not a gay. It's similar, but an undiscriminating gay can't tell the difference and they hit on you. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, all right.
Gator.
All right. In the benefics, the Uranian light is in the aura in that way. All right, let's go on here and let me get back to my notes. We're coming along really nicely here. I'm not going to make it. We didn't make it in an hour, did we? Well, we're shooting for 90 minutes.
In the afflictions, have you found that often love relationships don't work out?
Yes. Yes.
Are they they're unrealistic?
That's unrealistic. There are too great of expectations. There are romantic swoons, and a woman may want you to write long poems to you or to her or something like that, and you just can't live up to it. It just isn't realistic. Now, in this horoscope, it's not rock solid clear whether the conjunction is benefic or whether it's malefic. Both planets have each of them a benefic aspect and a malefic aspect beside the conjunction. However, Venus is the strongest planet, and her strongest second aspect is a sextile. And that sextile is stronger than the strongest second aspect for Uranus, which is the square to Mars. So it looks more, it's a variable thing probably, but it looks like overall that the benefic qualities are more likely to fall out than the malefics. Now, in these aspects, in the whole family, if Uranus is much stronger, the whole aspect has a case, this is not our case because Venus is stronger in our case. The whole aspect or the whole quality of consciousness is such that the clarity of the truth and the intuition are almost shocking. The beauty is second nature. It's secondary, not second nature, but secondary. If it is in romanticism, it's associated with the divine, especially with a love that can't be exaggerated. The creative products of such a person, where Uranus is much stronger than Venus, is everything is so new and so unprecedented, or what it's trying to say comes through so shockingly clear that you don't even notice the art or what the artifice is that the person is trying to do. If both planets are of similar strength, which is again not our case, the resulting relationship is the relationship of art and taste to divine love and creativity in such a way that it is like tights to the human body. That is, the art clings to the spiritual form. And what the art is doing is merely emphasizing some quality that it picks up intuitively. Because when you wear tights, the musculature shows through differently. There's different shadings than when you look at somebody not wearing tights. You look at the muscles, you see them in a different way. If Venus is much stronger, which is our case, what happens is the creation is more ornate. It takes the intuitive love that comes from Uranus and it runs with it. It's inspired, but in some ways it doesn't know when to stop. In romanticism, the romanticism is flowery. It isn't the super realism of it, it's the floweriness of it. In our case with Cat Stevens, when Venus takes the intuition and love, as discussed when we were talking about light, and runs with it, it runs in words, Gemini words. Now, it isn't meant to be anti-intellectual, but the Venus-Uranus consciousness treats words as if they were colored blocks or colored units to create with. They're like little pieces in a mosaic. It's not that there isn't any truth to what's being said, but that things are intuitively assembled and they form a picture with words that is more important with the picturing and the coloring and the assemblage than just plain didactic writing. This is not somebody that's trying to write a poem. This is somebody that is actually making pictures. Now, there's a lot of air in this whole combination. And air, the air element has about it a very evanescent quality. So what we're talking about here, the intuitive truth that is beautified through the Venus, is not kind of truth that you chisel in stone. It's more like the kind of truth that's whispered in the wind. This is not a desire even to be eternal, but more of a desire to share truth in its communication. See, in the element, it's very, very subtle. When the intuition comes out in words, it has to come out through Neptune. But because Neptune is not directly connected with either Venus or Uranus by aspect, but only indirectly by disposition and deposition, Neptune has a degree of autonomy. And the relationship of Neptune to the whole combination is something like a guest in a foreign kingdom. The guest has to abide by the customs of the kingdom, but its basic nature is not changed. And its basic behavior is not changed other than following the customs of the nation that it's in. In this case, what Neptune does is adds its spookiness or its illusoriness. And so the loving truth, if you're not careful, for all of its lovely tone pictures and clear spontaneity, is given a little bit more of an eerie or a psychological tinge. Let's look a little more at the Neptune. Let's first begin with Mercury. Planet aspecting Neptune, for the strongest aspect of Neptune. Mercury is in Cancer, and it doesn't do well in watery signs. It's a sea. It likes to be in the air, or it likes to be on Earth where there are specific facts. It can't think well about emotion because emotion is foreign to the mind. The mind is even distrustful of it. The pure mercurial type of individual will think that emotions and feelings are the stuff of superstition. Moreover, Mercury does not like the ninth house, or it doesn't do well there. The forte of Mercury is concentrating on specific facts, on data. And when the concrete mind is asked to do something abstract and to generalize, it has nothing there for traction. The idea of generalization or universalization for Gemini is just repeating something over again and again and again, which is really not universalization. It's multiple repetitions. The affliction with Neptune is a rather strong square. In it, Mercury is trying to rationalize spiritual universals. And that's a task that's impossible to attempt when it's unsuited for it. And so what happens is a babble, or a garble, or a confusion of words and thoughts. So Cat Stevens, with his talent and appreciation for the clear and the uncomplicated, sometimes if he gets mental with it, he gets entangled. And he can't get into matters that are too entailed. But even in these things, there's a glimmer or an echo of truth. Now, there are other characteristics of this combination of planets in the Aries signs. Neptune not only rules sensitivity, but also impressionability, which is the lingering effect of sensitivity when something lives on in a more subtle realm. And its activity then is in the inner constitution. Now the Aries signs are not impressionable because there's nothing much to make an impression in. Everything passes right through them. There is impressionability in the Cancerian planets, especially the Sun, but that's in another part of the character or in another part of the psychological mechanism, not the part that we're looking at. So if anything, this points to his being isolated alone, not only with his fame, but with his impressions that as impressions don't make it to the personality. So what we're seeing is a sensitive person that's highly spontaneous and that lives in a very fluent, subtle atmosphere. It's someone that's like a bird that's suspended perpetually in the air and is longing for a nest. But the bird is suspended in the air. The bird lives by sensitivity and intuition, and it thrives because it's not clinging to the changes of the atmosphere, and it benefits by them. So this longing, both for connecting his impressions with the sensitivity that generates them, there's a longing for that kind of unity, and there's a longing for some kind of a nest or home, and he tries to satisfy that by religion. And it can't really be done. And so he gets stirred to action again. In fact, the result, he's vowed now even though it's, ooh, it didn't break. I must have dropped to the wrong side. He's vowing to go back to singing again, writing songs and singing after this whole episode, which I think would be great. I think would be very great, because that's what somebody like that is meant to do. We're coming down the home stretch here. We have just one or two little things to pick up.
You said air signs are not, what did you say? Air signs are not impressionable?
That's right. It's hard to impress something on air. Water, earth, there's something that sticks and holds.
So that's what's giving him trouble. It's an air sign, even though he has...
Well, yeah, I would say giving him trouble. It's just the nature of his being. He in himself, inwardly, the Sun and Cancer part, which loves impressions and wants to live in them, feels lonely because it is apart from the main activity of his personality, which is indicated by the very strong Venus being the life ruler. But I wouldn't say it's so far that he's really in trouble from it.
Just, would I be right though in saying, or in gathering from what you're saying and looking at the signs, the Neptune, and that because it's in air, that this man basically couldn't take a solid position if his life depended on it?
Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. He looks for regularity and reliability. All right, there's one aspect of the personality and the astrological combination that we've been looking at of the ascendant and the ninth house that seems worth examining. And it's something that seems paradoxical. Intuitions in sensitivity are instantaneous. They're brief and they're fleeting, but they have the feeling and character of eternity. An intuitive instant or an intuitive moment can seem timeless. The truth itself seems eternal and permanent. Sometimes it even seems static. I'm certainly not certain about that. The perception and the experience of truth seems to occur with life and with movement and with change. Animals know this. If you walk through the woods, an animal knows that all it has to do is stay motionless and it won't be detected. If it moves, we're much more likely to be conscious of it. If we move, even if we move our eyes and scan a field of vision, we are more likely to be aware of the features and objects, to pick things out. So movement and change is necessary for the consciousness of something that seems to be eternal. Intuitions and insights occur more often if we move or if we change in some way. If we travel, if we relocate, or if we even change a habit, we become more intuitive. When we make these moves or change, we have gaps or voids in our habitual continuity of consciousness. And these gaps or voids are openings for intuition or windows into the world that we see intuitively. Now, this horoscope has cardinal signs on the angles. All of the planets that have the most to do with personality are in cardinal signs or in common signs. This means that this personality is subject to a lot of change and adapting to change. Uranus and Neptune each rule a different kind of intuition. Uranus, you know that something is true right away. You feel the truth of it. Neptune, you not only know that something is true, you know why it's true or how it's true. Uranus and Neptune are the two most intuitive planets. So it's really safe to say, in this personality, if you had to say nothing else about it, that this is a life with a lot of change, and because of the change, or with the change, there's a good deal of intuition. You might even want to say that intuitive insight and creativity is part of the reason for the change as well as a product of the change. It's sort of like a self-feeding kind of thing. Now, it's really fascinating how this has worked into his life. In some cases, it wasn't intended by him, but it was effective anyway. In some cases, it was intentional, but it was only of mixed success. And there are two areas where change is pronounced. One was unintentional, and the other one more intentional.
Question.
Yes?
Since you brought up the thing about truth with Uranus and Neptune, the fact that Neptune is in an Aries sign, but a cardinal sign for change, and the fact that Uranus is in Gemini and a mutable or common sign, would mean that this guy would have difficulty determining the truth?
No.
Or it would change often?
No. Oh, he might go under quite a change in evolution, but it is because of the change that he's intuitive.
Intuitive, he would get it, but as far as it would never be a fixed truth for him. Would that be correct in saying?
That's correct. Yes. And that's part of his problem. Because he wants something more fixed. He is like the kid that moves all the time and never has a fixed home. It's the whole personality has that feeling about it.
Yeah, because it's the sun, the answer is one of home.
Yes. All right. Of all the planets directly or indirectly involved with the personality, they're all in some way connected to the ninth house. And the ninth house is the house of religion. And we talk a little bit about that in the written personality brief. Now let's look at something else. Let's look at some facts and circumstances. His father was Greek, from Greece. His mother was Swedish, from Sweden. And he was born into the Greek Orthodox Church. However, when it came time for his education, for some strange reason, his father thought it would be better and more stable for him to become a Roman Catholic. So he was sent to Roman Catholic schools and received Catholic religious education, and I believe he even became a Catholic for a period in his life. Now, this is extraordinary. For a Greek to take on Roman Catholicism, wow! This is not an ordinary background that he has. When he began to come into his own as an artist, he was enthusiastic about learning about anything and everything in terms of cults. As the pressures of fame and celebrity and too much floatiness in the intuition came to him, he sought out Islam for something with stability. Now, most of these religious changes were not deliberate. The only one really was Islam. The other ones were chosen for him or just came upon him in terms of a regular explanation. But in all cases, whether his father thought it was better for his stability or whether he thought Islam was better for his stability, stability was the reason for the religious choices, even though he didn't consciously make them all. Now, the spiritually ironic thing about this is that as Uranus and Neptune tend to be spiritually ironic, that is, they did not result in stability. And in some ways, they had the opposite effect. However, they did result in intuition, which was probably, to some kind of divine intent. So you can see that very thing that Jerry was just trying to talk about. One last little thing to look at. We have said that Gemini has a lot to do with words, as does the other mercurial sign, Virgo. The common signs are as much adaptability as change. Cardinal signs are change, but not always adaptability. The common signs are usually not stable. In them, in their flimsiness, sometimes they're even decadent, because they can't hold up to responsibility. But they're well suited to thought. The first two common signs to concrete thought, the last two to abstract thought. Now, sometimes when one becomes too cozy with words, an unrealism comes, something like a romantic unrealism that we were talking about before, such that people feel, change your name, change yourself. The Gemini and Virgo, when they are strong influences in a life, are the people who are most likely to change their names. Cat Stevens was born by the name Stefan Dmitri Gregorio. When he was a young man, very clean cut, impeccably dressed and stylish, singing in pop clubs, he called himself Steve Adams. When he became the not so questionable folk singer, he was just a little too edgy. He wasn't folky enough. He became Cat Stevens. When he converted to Islam and took an arranged marriage, he became Yusuf Islam. Now, it's funny that I don't know whether it's a chicken or egg thing, but it's the fact that he did change his name. He did change the circumstances and character of his life. The names that he took were tasteful, and they were appropriate to the types of things that he was doing. Well, you know, Cat Stevens is a perfect kind of a name for a folk singer. And he did indeed change the appearances of his personality. He could put on camouflage, as you'd expect with Neptune rising. But it's not clear whether the intuition grew as much from the changes of name which were deliberate as it did from the undeliberated changes, the major changes in religion and social circumstance and health and things like that. Well, we didn't get too far, but it'll have to be enough for this time. And yeah.
In this is, he was, born Greek in the Greek Orthodox, okay? Now there's something that is rather rigid and firm, okay? So is Catholicism, for that matter. But then he chooses Islam, which he figures to be the thing that will really change his life. When one of the things that probably really changed his life the most was getting married, and he let that be arranged for him, just like the other,
Sometimes I think about the personality that you can sometimes be so sensitive and so intuitive that you can't stand it, and that you need something to hold you up, because it's just too much, because our spiritual development isn't such that we can go at that full time like that. And I sometimes think that was what was involved with this character. That's it. Oh, we went over 90 minutes.